Senator David Leyonhjelm thinks that this budget should be a chance for a national reset. He's a Liberal Democrat senator and he writes a regular column in the Australian Financial Review. Senator Leyonhjelm, thanks for coming on this afternoon. I know it must be busy for you.
Good afternoon, Steve.
First of all, does anyone have a plan to pay down Australia's debt level?
Well, I do, but I think I might be a pretty lonely voice. The government talks about bringing the budget back into balance so that we're not actually increasing the debt. We've actually had, I think it's 11 years in a row now where the Treasurer of the time, and obviously there's been several, has said we'll return to surplus in 4 years. So 4 years has turned into 11 years, I think. And I expect this evening when we hear the budget, we might hear that they've brought it down to 3 years, or they'll tell us they bring it down to 3 years. But we're talking about only balancing the budget. So to your point about paying off the debt, I'm not holding my breath on that at all. I don't think there's any priority given to that by either side of politics.
When the Parliament was debating, those tax law amendment bill to bring in tax cuts, the government said at the time that they'd halved the growth in spending under Labor, that the coalition had reduced the growth in debt by 2/3, and they're on track to balance the budget by 2021. Do you agree with that? Have they cut the growth in the debt by 2/3?
Well, I don't know about the 2/3, but yes, they have slowed the rate of growth of debt, I suppose, put it that way. Their argument is that the Labor Party left them with a bit of a poisoned chalice, with having locked in by legislation various programs which required funding, but no budgeting for that funding had been provided for, and the Labor Party had not actually identified how they thought they were going to pay for it. So they're saying, now the Liberal government is saying, well, we stopped the trajectory of growth of that debt. But I mean, from my point of view, they've missed an awful lot of opportunities to reduce debt. That for political reasons, primarily, they're just not committed to bringing the Australian public with them in the way that I think they should.
Well, you've argued that federal spending is too high. So why is federal government spending too high? Where is it too high?
Well, two big areas that I point to. There's quite a lot of areas that the government just doesn't need to get involved in a number of areas. Many times it's because people can do a better job of looking after themselves than the government will do looking after them, and all you really need is a safety net for the very low incomes. But they also duplicate stuff. So we have a state environment department in every state. We also have a federal environment department. We have a health department in every state and a health department in Canberra. And of course we have an education system in every state, and we have a federal education system.
So let's look at health and education. Does the federal government run any hospitals anywhere in Australia?
No, not one at all. Not one. They employ doctors, but they don't treat any patients. They're all administrative, advisory, technical type people.
All right. Does the Federal Education Department run any schools in Australia?
Not one. Not one. And yet they tell the states how to do it, and they have all these work on curriculums and policies, and they're a major source of funding, especially for the non-government schools. Of course, the states still largely manage their state schools, but the Commonwealth funds the non-government sector, including the Catholic schools and the private schools, and they fight endlessly about whether the funding is sufficient. It's all ridiculous.
So, from your point of view, there's a whole range of areas where government is duplicated. I mean, it's odd, isn't it, to have federal departments of education, but they have not one single student. They don't run any schools.
Yes.
And federal department of health, and they have no patients, and they don't run hospitals.
Yes, it's a consequence of our distorted federation. In many other federations, the states would have their own fundraising capabilities and would make these spending decisions looking after education and health, for example, independently of the federal government, and they'd live with their consequences. And in a competitive federation, under competitive federalism, each state would then be, open to scrutiny. Which state has got a better policy? Which state has lower taxes, a more competitive environment? And they, learn from each other. Australia has a very distorted federation. The Commonwealth does all the fundraising, mostly, apart from the annoying things like payroll taxes and stamp duties and land taxes and things like that really annoy us. Commonwealth does the heavy lifting in terms of raising money, and then they give it to the states to spend. And of course, because it's coming from them, they think they have a right then to tell the states how to spend it.
And not unreasonably, the states get upset at that.
No, states do indeed. Yes, they do indeed. And they say, well, we know how to do it. But then when the Commonwealth has said to the states in the past, and it's a fairly long time, it's under Malcolm Fraser's Prime Ministership that this occurred, the Commonwealth has said to the states, okay, well, we will withdraw from those areas. We will give you the taxing ability. We'll give you back the taxing ability which you lost during the Second World War. And so you can impose your own taxes and pay for your own education and health systems. The states knocked it back. So I don't, I'm not very optimistic about there ever being too much common sense in this area.
My guest is Senator David Leyonhjelm. He's the Liberal Democrat Senator for New South Wales. He writes a regular column in the Australian Financial Review. Last Friday, he wrote an alternative 2018 budget to reset the national agenda. This is ABC Radio Brisbane. Steve Austin's my name. I want to know what you think of our national debt, whether it troubles you as a voter, as a taxpayer. You can call now, 1300 222 612, or send a text, 0467 922 612. When Labor lost office federally, David Leyonhjelm, they racked up, I think, was it a $250 billion worth of debt? What is it today?
Depends how you measure it. It's over 500.
So it's over. They've nearly doubled it, basically.
Yes, they've almost doubled it. Some people say it's over 600 now, but it depends what you add in and take out. The government tends to leave out debt for asset development, and they say the NBN, for example.
So they say it's a productive asset, not a liability.
Correct. Yeah. But,
there's some debate about that, yes.
Yeah, there's some debate about that, whether the NBN is actually an asset or a liability. Yeah. But yes, so there's a bit of debate about how much the national debt is. But if you took all things in, I think it's 680-something million is the last figure I saw.
All right. Now, Wayne Swan tweeted out today that the debt had doubled under the federal government. And he asked, and I think not unreasonably, where's the bang for the buck?
Yes.
So what have we got for the doubling of the debt over the previous federal Labor administration?
Not very much. The truth is the borrowing has largely been to fund recurrent expenditure, so to pay people for pensions, to pay for schools, to pay for hospitals, to pay for the submarines and air warfare destroyers and all those sorts of things. So, and you could argue maybe borrowing money to build a submarine and build a destroyer is not a bad thing because they're an asset and we need to defend ourselves. And, there is an argument, whether you believe it or not, that the NBN is a worthwhile investment. But even so, the vast majority of the borrowing has been to pay for things for which you see no permanent outcome. No new roads, no new hospitals, no new submarines, nothing like that. Just paying for pensions, paying for schools, paying for old age pensions, welfare, unemployment, disability pensions, all that sort of stuff. So we see nothing for it. We can't live within our means, in other words. That's what it amounts to.
Is it wise to borrow to pay for recurrent expenditure like that?
Overall, in the long term, no, because what you're doing is passing debt on to future generations who have to pay for it somehow. So the taxes of people who are just joining the workforce now, the youngsters, and the people who are still to join the workforce will be paying for that debt, which has been used, that money which has been used for the current generation. So no, it's decidedly unfair and unreasonable. You can argue that in an economic cycle, which there are good years and bad years, and the government's funding requirements don't go up and down accordingly, that some years you might have a net debt and you have to borrow some money, and other years you might have a surplus. But if you go across the cycle, and arguments about whether the cycle's 5 years or 10 years or whatever you want to make it. But across the cycle, there should be no net increase in debt. Now, that's something we haven't had. As you mentioned in your introduction, since in the last 10 years, we've had a huge increase in debt from zero debt in 2007 when the Howard Costello government lost office.
The government scrapped or has indicated they'll be scrapping the Medicare levy as a means to, to fix their funding. But there was no real demand for that. I mean, they could have actually used that money to actually start to rebalance the budget earlier, couldn't they?
Well, it amounted to a tax increase, and obviously the pressure is on not to do that. I think in tonight's budget there will be a reduction in income taxes, and so putting up the Medicare levy is the opposite of doing that. It's the NDIS, of course, is hugely controversial. It's immensely bureaucratic. Everybody has a soft spot for helping the disabled, but whether the NDIS is the appropriate mechanism for doing it, and whether you need the bureaucracy and all the other stuff that goes along with it is a moot point. And then, of course, these systems, these schemes always get rorted. One of the immediate ones that's only just starting to be apparent now is how disabled do you have to be? The profoundly disabled obviously need assistance, and the packages that they've designed are intended to help them. They probably will help most of the people involved. But what about mental disability? How mentally disabled do you have to be? Is depression sufficient disability for you to qualify for a package under the NDIS?
Right. There's a range of questions about it.
Amazing number of people who are putting their hands up saying, "I deserve this." Now, that's part of our bigger problem, the number of people who say, I deserve some money.
Right. Look, I have to leave it there, but thank you so much. I know it's a busy afternoon for you. Thank you so much for coming on this afternoon.
My pleasure.
Senator